Okay, thanks, Demeric. Um, yeah, the Tudhope story is a fascinating one, and I'm here this evening to introduce you to some of its highlights. I've had a fair amount to do with Tudhope cars and carriages, and so I've got slides and anecdotes and other information. Tonight, I'm representing the Orillia Heritage Center, a charitable corporation dedicated to preserving Orillia's industrial heritage. We own a 1923 American LaFrance fire truck, the city's first motorized firefighting apparatus, a fully restored 1912 Tudhope, and a recently acquired 1914 Fisher. The LaFrance and Tudhope, and soon the Fisher, are licensed and drivable and are used in parades, displays, and shows in Orillia and beyond. I was introduced to Tudhope cars, as Demeric said, by my late father, Gordon Smith, who was, among other things, one of the first collectors of antique cars in Canada. He was also the best father in the world, and he shared his love of early automobiles with me. Dad came to Orillia to found radio station CFOR, but he already was aware that automobiles were built in town. He started looking for locally built cars, and at the peak of his collecting, owned four of them, including this 1912 Tudhope Touring. Um, that's me on my mother's knee in this shot, taken in Gravenhurst in 1953. Now, I'm not so sure about the Elmer Fudd hat I was wearing, but anyway. Interestingly, the Model T in the background was recently acquired by the Canadian Automotive Museum. In 1967, I drove that same car in a big parade celebrating both Canada's and Orillia's centennials. 16 years old, I had failed my first attempt at getting my driver's license, but that didn't faze my dad. I was also unable to shift gears on the car, and that wasn't helpful. At the end of the parade, I was breathing a sigh of relief when a guy about my age approached the car, and it turned out it was Tim Spencer, a great grandson of J.B. Tudhope, and he was accompanied by Andy Tudhope, a much older cousin. Understandably, they were both very interested in the car, and I felt I needed to offer them a ride. Now, I'm sure I felt their teeth, I set their teeth on edge as I crunched through the non-synchro mesh gears, but it couldn't have affected them too much, as Tim and I quickly became fast friends. Through him, I started to learn more about the history of the Tudhope industries and their impact on the community, and our mutual interest in this fascinating piece of local history continues to this day. And again, as Demeric said, another important mentor in my antique car life was the late Glenn Beckler, longtime family friend and co-author of Cars of Canada, the definitive account of Canadian automotive history. He taught me to try my best to get things right. For many years, there were stories in the collector car hobby about the Tudhope Motor Company that weren't quite accurate, and in fact, some of them were way off. This evening, my presentation will be in two parts. First, we'll take a look at the history side, then focus on the cars themselves. And at the end, I'm happy to try and answer any questions you might have. Well, where to start? It has to be with William Tudhope, who was born in South Lanarkshire, Scotland in 1831 and emigrated to Canada with his parents and 8 siblings. The family settled on a farm on the 10th line of Oro Township, but it was anything but smooth sailing for them. By the time William was 3, both his parents had died. George, the oldest of the children and just 18 at the time, took on the responsibility for keeping the family together. Their nearest neighbors were 2 miles away, and services were few and far between. Essentially, there were no opportunities for the children to attend school. Somehow, William spent part of his boyhood with a Dr. Darling who lived on Manitoulin Island. Later, he learned the craft of blacksmithing, and after a stay in Batavia, New York, in 1854, he returned to the 10th line, where he opened his own shop, making iron hardware, harness, and wagon parts. By 1876, he had relocated to a site on Andrew Street in Orillia, where he expanded into building horse-drawn carriages of all types. He called his business the Tudhope Carriage Company, and he became known for his excellent craftsmanship. William, in addition to being skilled at his trade, was a visionary. With the advent of the railway across the country, he traveled throughout Canada, setting up a network of sales agents. This soon resulted in excellent sales and an ongoing expansion of the plant's capacity. Tudhope products made in the late 19th to mid 20th century were marketed and sold literally coast to coast. These days, you can find examples of their carriages, automobiles, farm machinery, and much more in museums and private collections in virtually every province. I know we're here to look at Tudhope automobiles, but you may be interested in their carriages too. Here's an illustration from the Tudhope sales catalog, which came out annually. These catalogs were about 1/4 of an inch thick with a different model on almost every page. A potential customer could choose from a dizzying range of styles and options. Shown here is a pretty basic 2-passenger buggy with optional top. And I'd like to show you a few of my favorite examples of Tudhope carriages and cutters from the collection of the Simcoe County Museum. So here's basically the same 2-passenger buggy with optional top. And you can see that this one's been lovingly restored in the authentic black and red color combination. This one really tickles my fancy. Known as a Democrat, it has removable seats. So it could function as a wagon or a delivery vehicle, but you could also put both seats in place and take the family to church on Sunday. And here we thought SUVs were the original crossover vehicles. This cutter is one of the fancier options. Note that it has doors and a top, and you can't see it here, but it has lovely plush upholstery, making it relatively cozy for a crisp winter ride, maybe like tonight, for example. A young man coming to pick up his lady friend would cut quite the swath in this elegant vehicle. A Corvette or Mustang, who needs them? Can you see the fancy striping on the panels of the body? There were men employed to do nothing but apply striping, all done by hand and likely with a fair amount of artistic license. It's doubtful the details would be exactly the same from one vehicle to the next. Beyond stripers, other specialized craftsmen were part of the Tudhope team. In addition to the obvious wood and metal workers, there were painters who applied paint and varnish all by hand, no spraying, and trimmers who installed very high quality upholstery and top coverings using only the best materials available. I tell you about William, who passed away in 1900, because I believe he deserves the credit for establishing the Tudhope name across the country and ramping up production exponentially to meet sales. Often his sons, and in particular company president James Brockett Tudhope, or JB as he was known, are seen as putting the Tudhope Carriage Company on the map. Now, not to diminish JB's and his brother's many contributions to the company and the industrial landscape of Orillia, but without the foundation put down by their father, I doubt the Tudhope Carriage Company and its offshoots would have flourished in the same way. With the arrival of the 20th century, automobile production became somewhat of a craze across North America, with countless designers and entrepreneurs wanting to get in on the ground floor. Now, I can't say this is a fact, but I have a very strong feeling that the majority of these folks got their starts in the carriage trade. In Orillia, the Tudhope Carriage Company, now under the leadership of JB, had been producing high-quality horse-drawn vehicles for more than a generation and marketing its products through its extensive sales network. Like many other industrialists, JB investigated the possibility of using an American design in a car built for the Canadian market. In those years, there were very high tariffs on automobiles imported from the USA, so it paid to produce cars on Canadian soil. And son of a gun, we're hearing about tariffs again, aren't we? But anyway, by 1908, in Oshawa, JB's good friend and competitor in the carriage trade, Sam McLaughlin, was manufacturing Buicks for the Canadian market. And established in 1904, the Ford Motor Company of Canada was thriving in Walkerville near Windsor. In a wider perspective, in the first half of the 20th century, automobiles were built in communities across the province, including Chatham, Tilbury, Woodstock, London, Kitchener-Waterloo, Stratford, Barrie, Penetanguishene, Toronto, Brockville, Kingston, Mount Bridges, Cambridge, and numerous others. With a nod to Oshawa and Sam McLaughlin, here's an example of one of the very first McLaughlins when it was in the hands of its first families. The picture was taken in Coldwater, Ontario, and it shows a 1908 four-cylinder model. Your last Thursday evening talk was on Russell cars, so you may be interested in this beautiful 1906 Russell made in Toronto by CCM, same people that have made bicycles, skates, and other sports equipment for generations. But as was the point was made in that last talk, they also made cars from 1905 to 1915, catering mostly to higher end customers. Back to Tudhopes. In September of 1908, the Orillia Packet and Times reported that a Tudhope automobile was being tested and demonstrated. Combining mechanical components purchased from the W.H. McIntyre Company of Auburn, Indiana, with Tudhope bodies, fenders, wheels, and trim, the first Orillia-built cars, known as Tudhope McIntyres, were soon available for sale to the automobile-hungry public. With high buggy-type wheels and simple body design, they closely resembled horse-drawn carriages. But their two-cylinder, air-cooled engines, double chain drive, and wheel steering meant owners could drive their vehicles down the road without the help of the old horse. This particular example from the collection of the Simcoe County Museum was purchased new by a pair of bachelor brothers near Woodville, Ontario. And you can note the similarity to the Tudhope carriage. Even the colors are the same. Production figures are lost, but in a few months, Tudhope produced a substantial number of these primitive automobiles, and they were marketed all across the country through the company's carriage sales agents. Here's one that was bought new in Kelowna, BC, and is now proudly displayed in that city's municipal museum. They had some prestigious early customers, including the Bell Telephone Company. The story goes that Bell sent a pair of men to Orillia to learn how to operate the little truck and subsequently drive it back to Toronto. However, due to repeated mechanical problems, it never completed the journey on its own steam and was shipped back to Orillia for repairs, maybe more than once. In fact, the McIntyre design was primitive even for the time, and quality control on the mechanical components imported from Indiana was, at best, sketchy. And for example, I say the metallurgy was on a par with old cheese, very susceptible to breakage. In August of 1909, disaster struck when the factory burned to the ground, just as cars were being readied for the automotive show at the CNE. The fire started in the paint shop and quickly spread to the rest of the factory, which was almost entirely constructed of wood. Hours after it started, there was nothing left. Undaunted, JB immediately began planning the construction of a new factory to produce carriages and automobiles. Within weeks, the work began and the building was completed in remarkably short order. In the meantime, JB investigated arrangements with other American automobile companies. He knew that the McIntyre design was outdated and would quickly lose public appeal. Soon he contracted with the Metzger Motor Car Company of Detroit, Michigan, to build a Canadian version of its Everett 30. Bryon Everett, a Canadian carriage builder who went to Detroit to make his fortune, and did, and seen here on the left, and super salesman William Metzger, here on the right, were the principals of the Metzger Company, and at the time were as well known and respected as Henry Ford and the Dodge brothers. As you might assume, they had previously been partners with Walter Flanders at EMF, EMF standing for Everett Metzger Flanders. It was a company that was soon taken over by Studebaker. For his part, JB was a highly regarded Canadian industrialist, the head of arguably the largest carriage manufacturing company in the country, maybe even the British Empire. From all accounts, he was an honest and progressive businessman, well respected by his employees and the wider community. Not afraid to step up to the plate, he served at various times as Reeve and Mayor of Orillia, Member of Provincial Parliament, and Member of Canadian Parliament. His home on the corner of Tecumseth and Peter Streets was state-of-the-art for its time and still stands today as Tudhope Manor, a home for seniors. JB was not a man to do anything by halves, and this time he intended to build automobiles in their entirety rather than relying on American parts. To this end, he established the Tudhope Motor Company as a separate entity, purchased state-of-the-art machinery, and looked to build a team of men with experience in the automotive industry. Using the Everett design, Tudhope's cast engine blocks, cut gears, stamped out frame rails, built bodies, and assembled everything into high-quality machines. The new models, which began to come off the line for the 1911 model year, were known as Everett 30s, but sales materials pointed out the many special Tudhope features that added to their value. With four-cylinder water-cooled engines, magneto ignition, and three-speed transmissions, they included some of the very best ideas in automotive engineering in an era when the automobile was in a constant state of evolution. I'm sure you would agree that this illustration from the 1911 sales catalog is a pretty amazing piece of art. Canadian automotive companies employed top-line artists to do their catalog illustrations. In fact, some members of the famous Group of Seven did this kind of work in their day jobs. I can't resist showing you something from the 1913 McLaughlin catalog. It looks to me that it could have been done either by Franklin Carmichael or A.Y. Jackson, but don't hold me to it. Getting back to Tudhope, they maintained production of horse-drawn vehicles, although with declining sales as more and more people made the switch to automobiles. To backtrack a couple of years, JB purchased several other carriage-making operations in Ontario, including McLaughlin in Oshawa and Canada Carriage in Brockville, shown here. He organized them into a company called Carriage Factories Limited. Turned out to be a relatively short-lived venture, winding down as horse-drawn vehicles fell out of favor with consumers. One more thing about Carriage Factories Limited and their Brockville operation, they marketed the Brockville 30, which was a rebadged Everett. Some months ago, I saw this picture on Facebook and thought I was being pretty smart by saying it was an Everett made by Tudhope. However, a sharp-eyed guy pointed out the script on the radiator, which, when you blow it up, says Brockville 30. I've seen numerous artist renderings for Brockville 30s over the years, but this is the only photograph I've come across. I imagine the cars were built in Orillia, with finishing touches perhaps added in Brockville. And it's not to be confused with the Brockville Atlas, which was an entirely different design and built a couple of years later. And this example is in the collection of the Canadian Automotive Museum. Sorry, pages stuck together. There we go. The future looked rosy for Tudhope, but in mid-1912 and without notice, the American parent company went through a major reorganization and was soon swallowed up by the United States Motor Company, a large automotive conglomerate designed to compete with the recently formed General Motors and the skyrocketing Ford Motor Company. The business arrangement with Tudhope's was terminated, and American production of the Everett 30 ceased. It also meant the end of research and development for the Tudhope Motor Car Company because it depended on the Metzger company for those services. Left on its own, the Orillia operation carried on with the cars rebadged as Tudhope's. By early 1912, a sleek and powerful six-cylinder 648, 48 horsepower, was added to the line, and in all models, body and fender design showed the beginnings of streamlining. It's interesting to note that the six-cylinder models were essentially stretch versions of the fours. The frame, hood, front fenders, and steering column were longer. The rear seat area was increased to accommodate a pair of jump seats. Underneath, however, much was shared with the fours, including transmission, axles, wheels, shift mechanism, and even internal engine parts such as pistons and connecting rods. By 1913, the cars were equipped with electric lighting, eliminating the need to fiddle with acetylene and kerosene lamps. The six-cylinder cars also had electric start. However, sales were slipping because of quickly aging engineering and competition from lower-priced vehicles such as the Model T Ford. Furthermore, it wasn't easy to find workers with automotive or machining experience. There were challenges in producing sufficient numbers of cars with a largely unqualified staff. Later that year, the Tudhope Motor Company was taken over by Frank Fisher and a group of investors establishing Fisher Motors. Sales offices were located in Walkerville, but the cars were still built in the plant in Orillia. Essentially, Fishers were rebadged Tudhopes with a few cosmetic tweaks. It's unknown how many cars they actually put together. One story says they simply used up existing parts, but there are no records indicating production numbers. Unfortunately, sales continued to be weak, and by early 1914, the end was near. The advent of World War I marked the end of automobile production in Orillia. I hope you can see this drawing clearly enough. Based on this drawing, we believe remaining parts may have been used for ambulances bound for European battlegrounds. During the war years, Tudhope and Fisher, like many other manufacturers across the province, turned their attention to producing munitions. After the war, through a branch called Orillia Bodies, Carriage Factories Limited continued an involvement in the automotive industry through manufacturing bodies for a variety of marques, including Overland, Essex, Yellow Cab, and Brooks. There was even the occasional custom body designed and built, including one for a Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. Shown here are a couple of Brooks steamers made in Stratford, each with an Orillia body. Brooks bodies were constructed mostly of wood and covered with material that looked like leather. This was not a normal feature of Orillia bodies. They were just supplying Brooks using their design. You can tell an Orillia-bodied Brooks by its door handles and use of conventional, not suicide front doors. They had another supplier of bodies, and I believe it was actually Gray in Chatham. Fisher Motors, in their part of the plant, made a broad range of automotive accessories and also developed an innovative ice cream scoop, which proved to be an excellent seller. It was available in a wide variety of sizes for both domestic and commercial use. I would guess that many people watching this presentation may remember using a similar ice cream scoop, perhaps not knowing it was designed and produced in Orillia. In 1928, Fisher Motors and the Tudhope Carriage Company were folded into a new entity, Tudhope Metal Specialties. Still later, it became known simply as Tudhope Specialties. J.B. died in 1936, turning the reins of the company over to his son, William Oliver Tudhope, or W.O., as he was known, who had served with distinction in World War I. With a hiatus during World War II, when the plant made Piat anti-tank shells, the company produced a wide range of sheet metal and electrical products. It's interesting to note that the plant was largely staffed by women during the war years. And here are some examples of Tudhope Specialties' later products. A fancy folding tray, nicely chrome plated. They also made a line of stoves and heaters. Here's one of their stoves. Even a toy stove. Now, can you imagine the field day safety advocates would have these days for a toy that would get hot enough to bake a cupcake or fry an egg? And an electric heater. And finally, a sleek trash can. By the end of World War II, Tudhope Specialties was in trouble. A couple of years previously, W.O.'s daughter Dorothy married Jack Spencer, shown here, a New Brunswick native and a highly regarded flight instructor in the Canadian war effort. He trained pilots from all over the British Commonwealth. Jack joined the management team at Tudhope's and, through a lot of hard work and visionary thinking, restored the company to profitability. W.O. passed away in 1963. Jack sold the company to Lear Siegler in 1968, and in 1974, it was sold again, this time to Hunter Enterprises. The Tudhope family helped found several other local companies, including the Orillia Tudhope Anderson Company, later known as Otaco, Canada Electric Castings, Standard Chemical of Longford, Tools and Hardware, and Canada Wood Specialties, a large woodworking factory. Along with other local companies, Orillia became the most significant industrial city north of Toronto. Manufacturing plants were served by a network of rail lines passing through Orillia, Grand Trunk, Canadian Pacific, Canadian National, Midland Railway, and numerous other smaller or short-lived lines ran through here. Orillia also had its own power generation and distribution system, with the generating portion still locally owned, in fact. It allowed the city to offer electricity at reasonable cost to manufacturers. For the time, Orillia was a progressive community, far from the polarized politics of today. More often than not, municipal leaders could come to consensus, and there was support for industry and the larger commercial sector. There was also built-in accountability for staff and management alike. Everyone shopped in the same stores, went to church on Sundays. Their children went to the same schools. Factory owners knew the names of most, if not all, of their employees. Now, admittedly, there was little concern for the environment, and in fact, many of Orillia's industries were located on or near wetlands. Factory workers often found themselves in dangerous and very unhealthy conditions. Orillia was not perfect, but for the most part, it worked and industry flourished. You may be interested to see a few examples of items manufactured in other Orillia plants started by the Tudhope family. Canada Wood Specialties made this cute toy. Mostly they produced broomsticks, golf tees, cheese boxes, munition crates, handles for Fisher and Tudhope ice cream scoops, and a whack of other wood products. Also on the toy theme, an Otako mini toy tanker. After World War II, Otako was left with a large inventory of sheet metal. A clever engineer in the plant got the idea of building toys. They were an overnight sensation. Boys all across the country were delighted to get a mini toy, and these days they're eagerly sought by collectors throughout North America. And in my own case, at Christmas in 1956, I was really happy to find an Imperial SO tanker under our family Christmas tree. Otako Auto Track. In the 30s through the 50s, you could buy a kit to convert a passenger car to a simple tractor. Many cash-strapped farmers did just that, and these primitive little workhorses were able to help with routine farm chores. I have driven the one on the right and can report that it was a bone-jarring experience, but it did prove my fillings were still firmly in place. Looking at a few non-Tudhope related products, let's start with an Eaton Vanishing Motor Camp. The Eatons were lumber people who had a shop across the street from Tudhope's. It is there this amazing vehicle would have been built, using a 1926 Rio automobile as a starting point. The big canvas tent could be folded down and stashed in a compartment in the back of the vehicle. It is recognized worldwide as being one of the very first RVs. In fact, Winnebago, more than once, tried to buy it from the Sauter family, who've owned it for almost 70 years. Jim Sauter of Niagara Falls is the current owner of this wonderful vehicle, and he drives and shows it regularly. Boat building was big in Orillia. This is a beaver runabout built by Dominion Enterprises in the 50s, with Hunter, Ross, Egloff, and Dean also making boats and canoes. Harris made high-quality paddles and oars. World-famous ditch burn, normally associated with Muskoka, got its start on the Orillia waterfront. This is a salesman model of a Faralloy minescraper. Faralloy and Elong made very heavy-duty machinery, especially for mining and lumbering. I can't imagine how many porcelain coated door push bars were made by Porcelain and Metal, or P&M. They were used to advertise soft drinks, cigarettes, clothing, you name it. P&M also supplied every kind of signage you can think of, and also shower stalls, even urinals. Lloyd's baby and doll carriages were marketed throughout Canada. How many of you sat in school desks and chairs like these ones made by Haywood Wakefield? I spent countless hours doing so while attending high school in Orillia. But this particular example differs from the ones in my experience in that it has no names or rude messages scratched into its surfaces. And I wonder what Beau Bichette would make of this baseball bat, made in the long winter months by the staff at Roland Boats. Let's take a closer look at the cars themselves. First, a Tudhope McIntyre. In about 1950, my dad tracked down this car, which is now owned by the Simcoe County Museum, and purchased it, using it in many parades and shows in the early days of the hobby. Here's what it looked like then. Once again, that's me on my mother's knee. Seems like I spent a lot of time there. Once Dad took it to a parade in Bracebridge. If you're familiar with that town, you will know there's a long, steep hill in the main street. The parade that day started at the top of the hill, and Dad was horrified when a bunch of overweight municipal politicians climbed into and onto the venerable high-wheeler whose brakes only suggested an ability to stop the car. Anyway, off they went, down the hill, And by using a combination of brakes and the planetary transmission reverse, Dad made it down the hill, not mowing down the marching band that was in front of him. He later would say, "I died 1,000 deaths that day." Here's an illustration from the 1909 Tudhope McIntyre catalog showing the engine, transmission, and other components. Today we'd call this a boxer engine, but in period lingo it was a two-cylinder opposed. The intake and exhaust manifolds were nothing more than plumbing. A mechanical oil pump delivered lube to several points on the engine, after which it mostly leaked out onto the ground. Here's one of their fancier body styles. They must have assembled a bunch of Tudhope McIntyres in very short order. At least 8 of them have survived to this day. The one in the collection of the Simcoe County Museum is probably the only example that is currently operational. Here's a shot of it on a recent test run. For a number of years, this car was kept running and frequently repaired by Gord and John Morton, who volunteered their time and expertise. It's a pretty wild thing to drive. The 3 pedals are, from left to right, exhaust cutout, brake, and low. The big lever on the far side is pulled back for reverse and a long way forward, out of reach, for high. There doesn't seem to be much provision for holding it neutral. The short spark and gas levers, that you can't actually see all that well here because they're on the other side of the steering column, are inconveniently located under the steering wheel, not ideal for a car that requires both hands on the wheel at all times. Like many primitive early cars, it would benefit from the driver having at least an extra hand, if not a leg too. Let's move on to the Everett. Here's another catalog illustration from the 1911 Standard Touring. Note the lack of front doors. Front doors, or four doors, F-O-R-E, doors, as they were called, only started coming into fashion about 1911. Here's a very sporty 4-passenger demi-tonneau. And not sporty, more like a China cabinet on wheels, is this, well, you would say it was an elegant coupe model. I don't know how many delivery cars they produced, but they were definitely before the days of Amazon. There are 2 complete 1911 Everett Standard Tourings, as well as a couple of other project cars in existence. This one was recently purchased by the Simcoe County Museum. Here are a few details of the 1912 436 in the collection of the Orillia Heritage Center. You will see that the trim is nickel-plated, which eliminated the need to polish brass. As you may know, the switch from brass to nickel picked up speed in 1911, with most manufacturers adopting it by the end of 1912. The exception was the Model T, of course, which carried on with brass until the start of the 1917 model year. The rear window design was unique to Tudhope's. Headlight detail. Tudhope used Gray and Davis lamps, which were among the best available at the time. And incidentally, the headlights burned acetylene gas, while the side and tail lights had kerosene and wicks. And the gear setup that you can see on the back of the front wheel there is for the speedometer drive, but you would be amazed at the number of people that look at that at a car show and will ask, is this car front wheel drive? The engine casting was an amazing piece of design. The exhaust manifold was integral with the block. There was no detachable cylinder head, Pistons and connecting rods were removed or installed from the bottom. Valves were accessed through individual ports along the top of the block. And here's the other side of the engine. And incidentally, the engines had a system for supplying oil to the crankcase on demand. It works well for the most part, but if it doesn't work well, the engine gets flooded with oil. The upholstery was beautiful, all done in diamond tufted leather. Even the door panels were elaborately trimmed to match the seats. Here's more of the control center. From left to right on the mahogany dash or firewall are the clock, which was an accessory, the ignition switch, and speedometer. The two large pedals are clutch and brake, with the aluminum accelerator pedal in between. The left lever operates the 3-speed plus reverse gate shift, and the right lever is the emergency brake. These cars are actually quite nice to drive. Um, the upholstery is comfortable, shifting is comparatively easy, and power is adequate. They have crank start, but with Bosch ignition and Holley carburetors, they start easily. Cruising speed is about 30 to 35 miles an hour. Earlier, I was speaking of EMFs, so I can't resist putting in this picture of not one, not two, but three EMFs on a recent Horseless Carriage Club of Southern Ontario tour. If another of our club's EMF owners had been able to attend, his would have made a record-setting 4. Other than the EMF registry, I doubt that any car club can boast of so many of this mark participating regularly in their events. And by the way, to put in a plug for the Horseless Carriage Club of Southern Ontario, if you own or have an interest in owning a vehicle built prior to 1916, I would encourage you to join the Horseless Carriage Club, or HCCSO as it is often referred to. We have a pretty vibrant group. We're attracting new members on a regular basis. We typically have 3 tours from spring through fall, plus monthly Zoom meetings, a garage tour, a bi-monthly newsletter, and a website. Let's take a closer look at the 6-cylinder Tudhopes. Sadly, there are none that have survived. So we have to look at catalog illustrations and period photographs. This is the 1912 Tudhope 6 Roadster, a pretty sporty machine. Note the oval gas tank on the rear deck, typical of racy roadsters of that period. Here's a shot of a young man and his Tudhope 6 Roadster. On the running board is a toolbox, and the 2 hoops would hold an acetylene tank, much like a plumber's tank, which supplied gas to the headlights. Under the steering wheel, if you look closely, you can see the bulb for the horn, which was probably concealed under the hood. This car would have had a wonderful weight to power ratio, and on a good road, it would be capable of some pretty high speeds for the time. This is a catalog illustration of the 1913 6 with 7-passenger coachwork. It had a gas tank at the rear of the car. A hand pump on the dash and a mechanical pump on the engine pressurized the tank, forcing gasoline to the carburetor. JB had one of these 6s, always chauffeur driven because, believe it or not, he never did learn to drive a car himself. His car was painted in a rich dark brown color, and his initials, JBT, appeared in a monogram on the side of the body. Unbeknownst to him, some of his employees called the car, and pardon my language here, Jim's Big Turd. In fairness, JB was held in very high regard by his staff, all of whom he could call by name. There's only one known Fisher, and it has recently been acquired by the Orillia Heritage Center through the generous financial support of car collector and enthusiast Gary Potter. Once again, my family has involvement in this car's history. Earlier, I mentioned that my father owned the local radio station. In the early 1950s, he and a young announcer, Pete McGarvey, hosted a weekly program called Motor Memories. They would banter back and forth about bits and pieces of automotive history, and at the end of each program, one of them would say, "And if you know of any antique cars in your neighborhood, please write to us." The letters poured in, including one that led Dad to find the Fisher sitting outside in a backyard in Wingham, Ontario. And this is how it looked the day he brought it home. And I apologize for the blurriness of this picture. Dad never got around to restoring it, but in about 1960, he removed the motor so a crack in the water jacket could be repaired. To make a long story somewhat shorter, in about 1983, he sold the Fisher to our friend Stan Passfield. This picture was taken the day the deal was completed. Stan's a very good mechanic, and he performed a thorough restoration of the car's chassis and engine. He never got as far as restoring the body and fenders. In 2006, he sold the project to Dr. Michael Francis, who took a few more steps toward completing the restoration, but mostly it remained in storage until his death just less than a year ago. When the estate was being settled, Orillia Heritage was able to buy the Fisher project thanks to Gary Potter's donation, and here's how it looked when we bought it. And here's how it looks now. We have a team of 4 guys, all members of Orillia Heritage, who typically get together at least once a week to work on it. In addition, we have several skilled craftsmen from the wider community assisting with woodworking, electrical stuff, and paintwork. We're pretty happy with the progress we're making, but we need to continue to raise money to support the project. Right now, we want to get finished paint on the body so we can deal with the upholstery. Wayne Shepherd, an Ontario antique car enthusiast and collector, has donated the money to pay for the leather and other materials. And local upholstery guru Rod Barkey and his brother Ron have offered to do the work at no cost. Bottom line is that we are delighted to have the Fisher stay in Orillia, and we hope to have the restoration completed in the next year or two. It hasn't been on the road since 1926 and has been partially or completely apart since 1960. So it's high time for it to be completed. In conclusion, I'd like to circle back to the Tudhope Motor Company. In 1910, when J.B. Tudhope was looking for a car to build, he partnered with Barney Everett and William Metzger, 2 giants in the Detroit automotive scene at the time. He built a state-of-the-art plant, looked to hire skilled staff, and they produced gorgeous cars. It should have been a recipe for success, but the wheels fell off when the Metzger Motor Car Company disappeared, leaving Tudhope on its own. We have no idea who JB approached, who all he might have approached as a potential partner, but let's suppose he had made an arrangement with, say, the Dodge brothers to build their car here. Who knows? Orillia could still be a powerhouse in the automotive industry. And Sam McLaughlin and General Motors of Canada, well, not to take anything away from Sam, but frankly, although he was an extremely astute businessman, he was also incredibly lucky that he happened to hitch himself to a winner. The next time you see a Tudhope McIntyre, Everett, Tudhope, or Fisher automobile, notice a car with an Orillia body, or maybe even scoop ice cream. Take a moment to imagine Orillia as Detroit of the North, and pay tribute to William Tudhope and his family for their many contributions to Orillia's proud industrial heritage. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. That was wonderful. As people are writing in questions, and I'm seeing some interesting ones already, do we have a sense of, because there are certainly lots of early car manufacturers in Canada that made, frankly, not very good cars. But Tudhope seems like they were going in with all the right stuff and managed to build kind of a not particularly good car almost by accident. Do we have a sense of why, things like the metallurgy on the early Tudhope McIntyres was so bad? This wasn't an inexperienced factory. These people were pretty good at building vehicles. What happened?
Well, in the case of the Tudhope McIntyres, they had nothing to do with the metallurgy. At least Tudhope's didn't. They imported all those mechanical parts. They were kind of like kit cars, really. McIntyre supplied the makings for automobiles to a number of other manufacturers, mostly in the American Midwest. Anderson and Black are two other names that come to mind. Um, and I guess the other thing is that the design of the cars it was outdated. Like in 1909, it was outdated already. I mean, um, McIntyre kind of evolved out of its predecessor, Kiblinger, and I believe Kiblinger started in 1906, building similar high wheelers, except I think they had tiller steering, the early ones. And they really were a bad design, compared to um, a 1906 Ford or a 1906 Oldsmobile or Rio or Buick, you know. Um, Now, the the Metzger design, the Everitt design, was a much more sophisticated design. Um, but they also ran into a couple of design flaws. With the bad roads at the time, there were issues with the transaxles, meaning the transmission is mounted directly on the rear axle, um, where there were some keyways that would shear off, and they were a bit problematic. So it didn't really help their reputation. But I think the big reason for their failure was Metzger disappearing.
Hmm. And that happened with a million different Canadian automotive manufacturers. Yeah.
It
You
did,
parts from somebody and they go bankrupt and suddenly you have no parts.
right?
Let me see here. Keith and Ted are asking related questions. First off, why did most of the, well, yeah, why did most of these Tudhope vehicles have right-hand drive? Start with that one.
Okay, well, virtually all automobiles built in North America had right-hand drive to start with. There were a few exceptions. In 1909, well, the fall of 1908, when the Model T was introduced, it was left-hand drive. Um, and I think in the early days, at the very early days, it was more important to see where the ditch was than to look for, to be aware of oncoming traffic. But as there were more cars on the road, it made sense to move the steering to the left, which is what Henry Ford did, and other manufacturers started following suit. And by about 1915, almost all of them were left-hand drive.
Neat. We have a question coming in from Dale that is a question that is very characteristic of Dale. Do we know what happened to the big cutting edge Tudhope factory that was in Orillia? Is it still around today in some form or another? Is it being used for something?
It is. It houses our city hall and part of Lakehead University, and there are lovely condos in another part of it.
Interesting. I don't think we've talked a lot in these talks about car factories getting reused. I think this is the first time I've ever seen a city hall end up in one.
Yeah, it's really quite charming, in fact.
Randy's asking if you know more. There's apparently a Tudhope on display in Simcoe. If you know more about its history or background or model.
In Simcoe, Ontario?
Apparently, news to me. Randy, if you have more details, let us know in the Q&A, please.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. I would like to know.
I'm intrigued by this idea of the company selling sort of tractor conversion kits. Was there ever an attempt, because they started off with a high wheeler, which is really a farmer's car, and then pivoted pretty quickly into more sort of traditional touring vehicles. Was there ever a sense of the company continuing to sort of do a farm focus in the background while still selling cars?
Well, they established the Tudhope Anderson Company, which evolved into the Orillia Tudhope Anderson Company, um, for the purpose of building farm machinery. And so they built plows and, um, well, plows and graders and wagons and I don't know what all. Um, but they were a separate company from the motor company.
Mhm.
And actually, in about 1923, I think it was, maybe it was 28, they got taken over by, um, well, he was an American actually, R.W. Phelps, um, who really built Otaco into it was a real going concern.
Mhm.
And it was during his time that they started to build the tractor conversions, the auto tracks.
Gotcha. Randy's clarifying it's the car you mentioned earlier in the talk, the one that's at the Simcoe County Museum.
Oh, the Simcoe County Museum.
Misspoke.
Okay, so what was the question about it?
Just if you could tell more about its history, make and model, how it got there.
Oh, okay. So it was discovered very unrestored on a riverbank in Calgary, Alberta, and was restored by a fellow who lived there. His name was Tom Taylor, I believe. And he had it for, well, quite a few years. And a few years ago, he sold it to a fellow named Terry Irish here in Ontario. I believe Terry lives in Smiths Falls or very near there. Um, and Terry had it, did some quite a bit of sorting out on it. Um, and then when he was ready to send it on to its next custodian, the Simcoe County Museum just happened to have some money saved up in an acquisition fund, and they were able to buy it, and they are absolutely thrilled. And the car runs and drives, and they're going to keep it, operational, which is really special.
John's asking a great historical question. Why wasn't there more of an urge to, build an all domestic design? Why were manufacturers like Tudhope so sort of gung ho about derivative designs and imported parts and things like that? What was the rationale?
Uh, hmm. Well, I'm not sure exactly. Um, Actually, Russell is the notable exception because, as was pointed out in the talk last month, um, they designed their stuff in house. Um, and it's not to say that there weren't other examples of automobiles being designed and built in house in Canada. I think it was, I don't know, I think maybe there wasn't the like sort of the base of engineering expertise in Canada at that time. Like it was Canada and even Ontario was still pretty rural.
Yeah. Certainly, I could definitely speak to that. There's a lot of early Canadian auto manufacturers where the only reason they exist is they managed to headhunt one person who knows a thing or two about cars. You're absolutely right. The knowledge base is so limited at this time that being able to find somebody who can has that kind of baked in skill and experience, or a design you can license or a design you can copy and try to make your own. It's not very patriotic, I guess, but it sort of is the economical way, or is seen as the economical way, and a lot of these early manufacturers to avoid making obvious mistakes, I guess. And Tudhope absolutely sort of fell victim to all the benefits and the huge downsides of that approach, like so many others did.
Well, and if you look at like horse-drawn vehicles, carriages and cutters and wagons and that type of thing. Um, the design was pretty rudimentary when it came right down to it. I mean, they might put some fancy paint and upholstery on things and so on, but
Yeah.
it came down to woodworking and very, very simple metalworking for the most part. And so it's a big step from that to, designing a 1912 Tudhope.
Mhm.
It's there's not much transference of engineering skill there.